We're back today again with the Realtor Roundtable, and this week we have lots and lots to talk about. There's been some crazy changes in the real estate business, or the real estate industry, I should say. And I think probably buyers and sellers out there have seen some interesting headlines, and we wanted to address some of the headlines today, talk about some of the myths, talk about some of the changes that the National Association of Realtors settlement has brought about with the mandates that go along with their settlement. So today you can join me with our expert realtors that are around the round table. There are still some questions in, the interpretation of what's happening with the settlement that are still being answered. But for the most part, we were just talking about offline that as realtors, we're getting a lot of the information from our real estate sources, but what we're seeing in the headlines is very, very, very misleading. So we wanted to attack that today and just jump in and approach some of those headlines and then give it some context so that if you are a buyer or seller or thinking about buying or selling a home in the near future, you are informed with fact instead of fiction. So is that a fair statement to say?
Sure.
Yes.
All right. So let me just read a couple of things because I want to get some of these headlines right. One of them is the settlement forces brokers to reduce their compensation. Or another one that I've seen is realtor fees will be slashed in half. Those type of headlines, if anybody seen those. So that actually is a false headline. That is clickbait, clearly. There is no mandate in this settlement that sets a standard or limits realtor commissions. It has always been negotiable. And there's even been a soundbite of a press conference by our president that said, for the first time in history, sellers can negotiate commissions. That is false. It's always been negotiable commissions. It has never been fixed. The settlement or the lawsuit itself was trying to prove collusion, that real estate fees are set between the brokerages. And I can tell you here, we have never had a conversation with other brokerages to say, hey, let's all make sure we charge X. So a lot of that information is false as well. You guys want to weigh in on any of that, on how it's been misleading that fees are necessarily going to be slashed in half or come down. So let me just point out traditionally what was the way that the commissions were handled. Typically, a seller hires a listing broker, the listing for a percentage or whatever fee they agree on. Then that listing broker would potentially offer part of that compensation up to other brokers, agents, to help incentivize the sale of the property. So that is not going away. The only thing that's going away is the ability to advertise what that percentage or fee or rate is that the listing agent is sharing or that the seller is offering to compensate other agents to sell the house. So that is no longer being allowed to be listed in the multiple listing service only. It can be advertised, and that's in one of my other points later, so we can go down that rabbit hole a bit more later, but it can be advertised in all other marketing fashions, which is bringing me back to why I don't believe necessarily this mandate is going to just slash prices of listing agents' commissions. Because as we were talking about, this is going to change how the game is played. If you think about compensating and cooperating with other realtors, aka buyer agents out there as a seller, what you're doing, or me as a listing broker, to cooperate with other agents and compensate part of my commission to them, what I'm doing is taking my sales force of 1 to a sales force of 12,000 in our area. Right? So we have about 12,000 agents in the area. So usually what that does is it shortens your selling time. It increases your exposure. It increases how many buyers are looking at your property in a short amount of time, so that then we get highest amount of sale price for your house. So if you think about things logically, if I now have to market for a lot longer, now that they're going to take this out of the multiple listing service, I'm already seeing other platforms coming out that we will have to pay for and pay to put our listings into so that we can offer compensation. So now our cost to sell is going to go up. Our time on the market will likely go up. And then as we were talking, Kendall and I were talking yesterday, think about as a listing agent, my job has really been more to market your property more than anything, more than to be a showing agent, right? So I'm not there to just open the door for everybody that calls on it. That's what I relied on our sales force of agents out there to do. So now as a listing agent, and we'll get into some of this more why later, but potentially this can shift how buyers view property, or not potentially, it is shifting how buyers can view properties easily by calling agents to then show them a house. It's going to put a lot more wear and tear on your listing agent to be available to show this property to consumers that don't commit to a real estate broker to work for them on the buy side. So think about that increase in my time, my efforts, all of that is going to make me more valuable as a listing agent. So theoretically, I'm probably not cutting my commissions in half, right? So we got to think about those things. You guys, give me your thoughts on that.
Well, like, wasn't the percentage of a dual agent like 3%? So the chances of a listing agent having their own buyer is pretty slim. And why would you even put it on the market if you have your own buyer?
Mm-hmm. So listing percentages are always negotiable. So everybody's going to set their own. So it's hard to say what it would be. You know, I would say under most circumstances, listing agreements entered into a seller didn't have a different price, a different rate.
I meant like
for
the percentage of actual dual agents.
Oh, gotcha. So the time that a house has, so percentage of sales.
Yes.
Gotcha. Percentage of sales about 3% of the time. I would have to look up those stats, but I believe you if that's what you said. It is rarer. It's not going to be as rare anymore. So,
number going up.
yeah. So I think, so let's jump into some of the other, because that's going to follow the reasoning why. Let's talk, anybody have any more comments on the listing side of things though? Lori?
Oh, I
think
that what I agree with you 100% that our job is to, I treat each of my houses like a small business.
Mm-hmm.
When I empathize with the sellers, but I treat the product like a small business.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to prep it, I'm going to market it, and I'm going to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I do all of those three things? Through a lot of time and effort, not only by me, but also by some sellers who like to put that much time and effort into it. So as a result, I need to market to the largest group of buyers that I can possibly market to, because as we know, the more buyers you have, the more offers you receive, potentially, if it's priced right. And then the more offers you receive, the more your price generally goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our job, to get you the best price that we possibly can for the project that we have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about that, now instead of the being able, as a buyer's agent, being able to see what commission they would potentially get from that home, that never played into my theory at all.
Mm-hmm.
I never felt that if it was going to be this or that, I was going to bring a different pool of buyers.
Yes.
So that was not so much a thing for me when marketing a home. It was more about the presentation of the product.
Right.
So, but now that you don't know what your commission is going to be, the big thing is,
or if there is one at all.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. The big thing is if you're on the other side of this, my buyer has a budget.
Correct.
That budget is usually tied to a loan. That loan requires a certain percentage down to get a certain rate.
Mm-hmm.
they are strapped at, let's say, $300,000 is the most that they can purchase for a home price. When I am now looking at all these listings to show my buyers, do I need money now for a commission?
Well,
Can I go see this house now?
mhm.
Can I show it to them, or are they going to be
Yeah.
over budget now that I have to
Yeah.
bake the commission into it? So it's really there's strategy involved and there's semantics involved. So I think that we need to differentiate between the two of
Yeah.
those.
So I say that because that's going to come into play when we talk about, is this really a win for buyers? Because that's what this is being billed as, like a win for buyers and sellers, bad realtors. We're helping the public. But we say, is it really a win? Because of that right there, what you just said, we then have to figure out what that budget is under the circumstances that there might be the obligation for that buyer to now pay out of pocket, right? Instead of within the loan of what the house costs. So we'll swing back to that in a second. I want to address that part of the headlines are saying that sellers no longer can pay buyer agents. That is false. False. They are not required to, but in reality, they never were. Except for the MLSs that were tied to the associations did have, at one point in time, they did have a requirement to cooperate and compensate. So I guess technically you could say they did have a requirement to pay a buyer agent before. But the requirement was as little as $1. Right? So the association said, hey, to use our MLS system, we want to make sure that you are cooperating with all agents within our MLS. And to do that, you do at least offer them some sort of a compensation of at least $1. That has since gone away. So throughout the process of the lawsuit, the National Association of Realtors came back and said, fine, we'll take that out. I mean, it was $1 anyway, so who cares? So that's gone. So that is another false headline out there that, now as a seller, I'm not allowed to pay the buyer agent anymore. That is completely 100% incorrect. Nothing can change if you don't want it to. So a seller can either still offer to pay, the buyer agent can pay, or there can be concessions that are offered by the seller to cover other costs of the buyer to help alleviate the buyer paying all these different fees. So those concessions can be advertised in the MLS, but not the offer of compensation for a buyer agent. So going back to wrap the very first falsity up is it going to lower the cost of selling your home? That's to be seen, because it's going to raise the cost for a realtor now, a listing agent, to sell your property if we can't cooperate with every single agent that's out there. Sellers, the mandate, I talked about that. The mandate already restricted. The compensation for buyers agents is just being displayed on the MLS, not the action. So you can cooperate. Now, sellers can still elect to pay a buyer agent, like they said, with incentives, or just, hey, I'm willing to split the commission, just like we were before. So that's a conversation between you and your agent to weigh out, and then decide how you're going to market the property based on your decisions on that. But it does not necessarily automatically alleviate you of, let's say your seller says, I don't want to offer it. Let's see what happens. It doesn't mean you're out scot-free, because under the circumstances, one of the changes before is, as realtors who had an MLS, who had an offer of compensation stated publicly that we could see, that was our guarantee of compensation. So we did not have to enter into any agreements with the other agents to lock in our compensation, because whatever was there was our guarantee. Well, that's gone. So now it's unclear. So you, as a seller, not offering a compensation out there for buyer agents does not mean you're saving it necessarily, because the buyer agent then can come in and write the offer and now negotiate commissions during the offer period, which was never allowed before.
Right.
we were not allowed as agents to make an offer and go, and by the way, I want X commission, when the MLS told us what our commission was.
Right.
So we weren't allowed to renegotiate that. Whatever that was, stayed. So now think about
It almost muddies the water.
It makes
Yeah.
sellers
100%.
more work on the sellers.
It's worse.
It is negotiating after the fact instead of before, like you had mentioned before we came on camera, I think. So yeah, if you don't already have some things established, you might have offered X and the buyer agent might come in and be asking for a lot more right now because they can. And then as buyers, you have to agree up front with your agent. So this is another big change. This is really, really important for buyers. So this is why, is it really a win for everybody? I mean, there's some positives that are coming out of it for us as realtors.
Well, just
Some.
making agents
This one.
do the buyer's
Yes.
consultation
So,
thoroughly.
so the big change for buyers is that agents now have to present you with their agency. So who am I representing? And then before they can do agent activities, showing you a house, setting up searches, all of those things, right? You as a buyer have to establish an employment agreement for a price with that realtor. So the silver lining for me and for us, I think, out of this whole thing is that gone are the days of calling up a bunch of different realtors and say, hey, can you show me this house? I don't want to commit to you, but show me a house. And real estate agents got up and ran and did it. And sometimes we end up with a deal, and a lot of the times we did it. So that is going away. You have to commit, whether it be limitedly, 1 day, one property, 1 month, 6 months, whatever it is. There has to be an established relationship up front and the compensation established before you can go run around and look at a bunch of houses with agents. So with that in mind, the agents, because of the mandate language, is that they can now negotiate their commissions into the offers, but they have to set a minimum standard with their buyer in that original agreement that you agree to, because nothing can be paid more than what's in that agreement. So be prepared.
A minimum or a maximum?
A minimum. So you're putting, this is what I'm getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
And if the seller says I'm going to pay more, you don't get it.
Right.
So that's why you're going to see changes happen, because we used to be like, oh, if in case somebody doesn't pay my commission, I'm going to just put this little number in here so it doesn't freak you out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that anymore, because now you're cutting yourself short of regular compensation of what a seller that is cooperating with agents might do. So now we're going to see larger minimums put in. You see, follow me
Yeah.
on that?
Yep.
You once you agree
Your
to
minimum is your maximum.
your minimum
Right.
exactly.
Yes.
You
Exactly.
can go down, you just can't go.
Yes.
Exactly.
No.
Once the buyer agrees with the agent that they want to represent them,
Yes.
how much they are willing to pay that agent, the agent cannot increase that commission
Correct.
at all.
Even if the
Nor can
seller's
the buyer.
offering it.
Correct. Even if the seller is offering it, and that cannot be amended.
That's to be seen.
Question mark.
That's a question I have sent up the channels as well.
Mhm.
Is that can you amend that agreement with your buyer prior to an offer? Now, I think if you're in an offer stage, it's probably too late. But those are some of the questions that are still a little bit unclear,
Right.
because logically thinking, you would think you could amend anything, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But the mandate specifically says you can go down, but you can't go up.
Right.
So if you can't amend one way, how can you amend the other way?
Right.
So there's got to be some more interpretation of that, I think, coming down the pike. And by the way, none of this is supposed to go into effect until July, and that's provided that the judge approves this settlement. And then the Department of Justice has to comment on it. So their approval basically with their comments as well. So potentially it could get delayed. It could be modified. this is the original proposal, settlement terms that we're waiting on for a final cross the T, dot the I's. But it is scheduled right now, if it all goes through with no changes, to take place in July. So you just need to understand what is happening and talk to your realtors to talk through the terms of all of this, because again, what we're seeing on the headlines are so completely misleading, and it is going to feel a little bit like the wild, wild west for a minute, I think, while we transition into this. But there's some benefits that can come out of it.
So
Go.
just thinking
Go.
for the consumer, just thinking, you have a buyer agency already signed right now. When and if that goes through, is that the time we make amendments to the current contracts we have prior to this going through? Like, what are we gonna have to do? Like, we're gonna have to
go back.
right? Or are they gonna say whatever's in place now is in place? We'll just finish those out.
They have not commented.
That is gonna be so much
Yes.
craziness.
Although what you have listed right now, as soon as they take that field out of the MLS, that disappears. So that is going to change midstream. So if we have something listed that hasn't sold by the time this change takes place, then but let's go back to, we can still market every other way besides the MLS,
Right.
that co-op
Yeah, you can write it.
percentage that we're offering as incentives to sell, for agents to sell the property. So rather it be a sign writer potentially on the sign, rather it be our own listings on our website, we can put that on our own listings on our own websites, right?
And advertising.
And advertising.
Facebook ads.
Yeah,
Reels,
everything else
social
just
media.
not
So I almost feel like we've actually just eliminated a lot of the technology advances of the last 22 years when IDX came in. So when first, we had a book for the MLS, then from the book came a floppy disk that was a download of the super system. And then in about 2000, I want to say 3, somewhere around that, is because Realtor.com came and started putting all the information online. So you can go to Realtor.com to find multiple listings from different companies. But it wasn't up until about 2003, you had to go to each company's website to see their listing inventory, or Realtor.com. Like those were the only two options at the time. And so it was amazing for people to have Realtor.com when it all kind of aggregated into one place. But up until then, it was, you go to XYZbroker.com to see their listings, and then you go to 𝕊𝕊𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿broker.com over here. And so it required a lot more work to do that. We're kind of rolling the clock back to that somewhat. It's gonna cause a lot more searching instead of it kind of automatically being there right in front of you. We'll have to search out what properties are having compensations, because as a buyer,
They'd have to work it out on the front end.
we've got to figure it out on the front end. So I think we almost have to factor in back to what you were saying before, worst case scenario.
I was just thinking, just as a lender, not that we don't already coordinate, but this is going to be extra hands on deck to talk about that buyer agency, what you're charging. I need to talk to my client and make sure that we have wiggle room for that, and also immediately researching those listings and seeing if they are, willing to split her back, because it's going to be a conversation. This is all going back to the finances of the buyer.
And think about this too, going back to extra work for the agents. Now we have to physically call every single agent,
What are you
Or
offering?
go to their website.
or hit them up and look it up. Like if it's there, not everybody's going to do it, right? So it's a lot more work to find out, is my buyer paying me, or potentially is this deal going to pay me? So it's a lot more time intensive.
But when the buyer signs with you all, they have to know up front that they have the room
Yes.
for this.
Correct.
They can't say, I'll give this to you as long as the home that we're offering on can kick it back in a concession,
Right.
right?
Which
Right.
I feel puts a
So
lot of
how-
lower income
how is this
families
gonna
in
work?
doubt. Yeah,
It won't work.
Yeah, it won't.
Yes.
There's a lot of people that
Thanks
have-
for your
Has
input.
to come up with down payment and
You
closing
gotta go
costs.
sell a house.
So really, it actually could potentially push the
Yes.
value of things down because they're not, or that whole segment of buyers is gonna lose out because
they're
they
gonna
can't
lose out
afford.
and they can't afford rent either because the rent
Right.
is.
Well, the assumption is that this whole thing is gonna push home prices down, but that's to be seen because home prices
have an
are
opinion on
based
that, too.
on
Yeah.
supply and demand,
Correct.
not whether a commission's
Yeah.
built in or not. So what's
Right.
gonna happen is the people that are getting their commission pays are gonna be the ones that win
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
get
that win the deal, and the
I can
people that aren't lose.
I can see the conversation on the listing appointment with the seller saying, well, okay, yeah, we'll offer a commission, but instead of charging $350 for my house, I want to charge $370,
Yes.
$375 now.
Yes.
So I feel like that a lot of the listings are now going to inflate their prices because they're not sure if the buyer is going to have the funds and has agreed to.
Well,
pay
devil's
for the agent.
advocate,
Yes, it's
Don't you
gonna
think
lower
they-
the buyer pool.
have been doing that traditionally anyway of like, but it's the question for me is like, how do you
So it's to
figure
appraise.
out value and appraisal values when a
Right.
lot of the comps had the commissions built in
Yeah.
and then the other ones aren't? Is the appraiser going to come back? Oh, well, because you're not paying commissions, that's going to change the value of your house. That all is to be seen.
100%.
I know. Homes
Based
on
on
commission.
commission.
Correct.
Based on-
Yeah,
Right.
so I would push back on that just a little bit because I feel like my conversations and listing appointments, generally when I do my recap sheet,
Yes.
it's not the commission part that they're
Well,
concerned
well, I
about.
think what
Well,
the
it shouldn't
media
be.
is saying is that again, it's going back to the assumption that you're cutting your commission in half.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying
Yeah.
devil's advocate is that, well, not really, because they're thinking I was already doing that anyway, but that's only under the assumption that you are charging a lower listing commission and then they've got to add that in because we're thinking, well, listing commissions might go up
Yeah.
now.
I actually fear the opposite.
Yeah.
Like as a consumer, if I'm thinking from a consumer and also because I'm an agent, I kind of almost fear the opposite. I fear that there might be some agents out there who are like, nope, my listing
Yes.
percentage
Yes,
is
blank.
that's it. And that could be more than what we were doing as the total between
Correct.
the two.
And it might
Correct.
be more
And that's
than
what I
listening.
kind of
Correct.
fear.
And
they're
it's
talking
an
about
unknown,
this
right?
was supposed to
going
be
back
so like to
you
bring
don't-
it
they're
to
gonna raise the price of their house.
transparency. But I
You
kind of feel
don't
like
know
it
what the
created
buyer
more of
anticipated.
possibility for people to act if they wanted to.
Yeah.
That's
Unethical. Thank you.
So going
That's
back to
where
what,
I get a little fearsome. Like,
Yeah. going back to what Lori was pointing out is assuming we're not doing a significant change in listing site commission, they then have to factor in an unknown amount that they might have to negotiate, right? In
The
their
buyer,
offer.
you mean?
Yeah, the seller would have
The
to
seller.
take into account,
Sure.
I know what I gotta pay Lori, but now I don't know what I'm paying the other, potentially what's gonna come in on this offer on the other side, so I better build in
A little
a
bit of
buffer
cushion.
in case what I was gonna offer was gonna be X, but now this other buyer agent might come in and ask for Y.
Which may not play in so well to the seller's market, but as soon as tables start to turn
Balance.
or equalize, which we know is not relatively soon,
Right.
we don't think, because it's your basic supply and demand, and we're still so under inventoried.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, everything is going to equalize and potentially could turn into a buyer's market. At which point, then the strategy and the negotiations are going to change. I think what the buyers really have, because you're always thinking about this from two sides, both strategically and from a sales standpoint. So from a sales standpoint and from a negotiation standpoint, you're always thinking about this from the two sides, right?
Right.
So what I really want the buyers to understand is that not only do they have to determine if they're going to pay their agent, not only A, if they're going to pay them, B, how much are they going to pay them, and C, are any concessions going to be offered on the other side? So there's a lot of unknowns when putting a contract together.
Correct.
Which I know can be in the verbiage.
Yeah.
But it's almost like you have to have a clear understanding of what you're going to be spending on each property that you go to from a commission standpoint. And it's almost like an appraisal gap. Are we going to have to cover this commission gap?
So every house you look at, you're gonna have to go do the research, see if they're paying, and then go back, think about what your buyer has available, and then see if they match up to that property.
Correct.
Correct.
Which when you're doing onesies and twosies or 2 or 3 a day, no problem. When you're doing a reload tour and you have maybe 10 to 12 houses lined up, that is already, sometimes challenging to line those up from a timing standpoint. Now you're going to have to put the forethought for your buyers into, hey, FYI, this one does not include this commission. This one does. This one does include a commission, but you also get a $2,000 concession. So there's going to be basic math involved.
Yeah.
Not a problem, but it really is it's a big deal for the buyers to understand that it's not just the home price and it's not just the loan. Now it's the commission as well and the down payment.
And if you think this market has been emotional, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
Honestly, because think about the agents that are going to say verbally, "Oh, we'll cooperate and pay X," and then you get your buyer excited about it. You get them, and then they come back and go, "Oh, seller changed their mind." Like there's no guarantee until you have something in writing that is a negotiated contract. So think about that. Or think about all the offers that come in. There's 15 offers. Now, not only do we have to go through all of the terms of the contract, now we've got variables of commissions playing into it too. Who needs concessions? Who needs commissions? All of that. So you've got to, that's going to be a whole lot hairier.
And as a listing agent, are you going to require that you understand what the other side has agreed to? Because if the buyer has agreed to pay the buyer's agent $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever it is for this property, do I want to still give my concession? You're already covered. So me as a seller, why should I give up my concession now?
Well, I think like our current buyer agency state is you agree to pay if there's not a compensation offered you somewhere else. I mean, you could write it however you want.
Well, I guess that's what I'm asking is.
But I think
what
generally
trumps
speaking,
which trumps which?
The language most digestible for a buyer is going to be, you agree to pay me X if there's not compensation out there that's paying me this.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of whispers from agents just talking about like an a la carte.
Yeah, there will be.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we're the only industry that can work a month for someone, a month for free.
Easily a month.
Yeah.
I mean,
when
you're prepping.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah.
Lenders get credit for that. But yeah, I've heard a lot of agents say, I will have this list of services, and if they can't
choose.
if they can't afford it,
Yeah,
yeah,
we're talking
try
about
about
it.
that.
If you want me to negotiate.
Well, I think we're going to see retainers come in to play. I think we're going to see credit cards,
Per
payment
showing,
plans.
possibly per showing cost.
Absolutely.
X amount to show
I
you.
set
that.
up my Stripe yesterday. I did.
I think it's going to be what we are here to serve the client, which is to guide and advise and strategically bring them the best agreement that we possibly can.
Yeah.
And how there's going to be, just like any strategy or any negotiation, there's going to be a bunch of different routes to the same destination. And even now, more than ever, and we talk about this all the time because we see what goes on in the industry when you have strong agents versus not as strong agents and what the result is. Even now, it's so important to really understand what's at risk when you purchase possibly the biggest purchase of your life.
Yes.
And make sure that you attach your wagon to the correct horse, for lack of a better analogy, expert, so that they can truly guide and advise you of what might be a little turbulent this year coming for as we all work through this and learn and strategize and negotiate and teach and really find the best solutions for our clients.
And I think it's super important for the consumer to change your mindset of how this all works, because the expectation for a consumer when you're selling a house is completely different than the expectation when you're buying a house. You call us over, you walk us through your house, we sit and share drinks at your table, we go through all types of data, we get to know each other, we build a rapport, we create a trust, you hire us, and we're your advisor on selling the house. Like, that is normal. And you work with one person, and you're listening to our advice and expertise. For so long, the buyer side didn't think of it that way. It was just anybody who's available can come meet me and show me a house, and I don't want to commit because I don't really know you. Well, you know what? Now you got to get to know me. Let's sit down and have these appointments, and let's talk about my value and what I bring to the table compared to the people that have been in the business for 8 months, and that might be a race to the bottom on their fees. Mine's not going to be, but here's the reasons why. And we need to establish that I want to work with you and you want to work with me, and then we consummate that relationship, and the trust is built between us versus you're hearing from 5 different agents, 5 different things, and now you never trust anybody, so it becomes a really wonky transaction. It's always been, hard, because we professionals, the experts that have always tried to follow the guidelines and do the right things for our consumers, which is come in. You want to see a house? Great. When can we book an appointment to sit down and talk about what I'm going to do for you, what the process is potentially going to look like, and how I'm going to get paid? And then from there, we'll go look at houses. We're flipping it around backwards. So we've always tried to operate that way, right? I mean, that's the way I've trained all of you guys, because that's the way I've always ran my business. But it was very challenging because the majority of the agents in our area weren't following those rules and guidelines. So then we would get confusion on the seller's side of like, why do I have to do this with you? The other agents aren't making me do this. Well, guess what? We're all going to have to do this.
It's crazy though, because this is a huge investment.
Yes.
You're just gonna pick
Isn't
whoever.
it? But here's
you don't
why.
know anything about
Because
them.
they're not thinking I'm paying any commissions.
Right.
So they're not thinking about the sale price of the house, but they should be, but they don't. So there's it's kind of willy-nilly because there's no money changing hands between them and us, right?
Right.
They're not thinking about, oh my
It
gosh, I'm spending
establishes-
$800,000. I better pick somebody that's really good. They're just,
They have to think of it more as
Beware.
they're now hiring somebody to
Correct.
represent them.
correct.
Just as you would hire a lawyer and accountant.
Which they were, but it wasn't the connect because there was no money changing
There
hands
was
between
no
the
financial
hire.
discussion about that
Correct.
payment up front because
Correct.
it was already dealt with for them.
Yes.
So let's talk about the one thing that I need a little clarity on is when I kind of the two sides again. If I'm the listing agent at an open house and or if a buyer calls from my sign on that house, the sign that's out in the yard, my name and number is always on there. Let's say a buyer, unrepresented, so which means they do not have an agent under contract to represent them, because a lot of open houses get people that are interested but haven't chose a agent yet. Fine.
They like to
We
go there because
encourage
they're
that.
not committed to anybody.
Yeah,
They don't
exactly.
wanna be bothered,
Yeah,
right? So they go to this.
100%. I completely understand. So, but how do we now handle an unrepresented buyer who wants to put an offer on the house and wants us to write that offer for them?
So Miranda rights.
My new thing is Mirandize them.
Yep.
Read them their rights. So as soon as a public comes into your open house, and honestly, we're probably gonna have recommendations of even signage,
Sure.
at the open house. That basically my Miranda joke is, you have the right to be represented in anything that you say or do right now until you're represented. I can use against you and can be used against you in negotiations. So I think that's immediately when someone comes into the open house, we're representing the seller, and until there is an agency disclosure and an agreement to pay into place, we don't represent you or do activities for you.
And
We're representing the seller.
what if we
So-
don't want to? There's a lot, I know
Refer.
there's like a ton of what if they can't afford to, you know, like what if, there's so many scenarios.
Well, and
so-
that's
Back
the
to
scenario
talk
that
to
you're
them.
going to work out with your seller, that if there is an unrepresented buyer that comes to the table, maybe your fee's the same, maybe you have a different fee. I mean, there's gonna be all kinds of crazy fee structures out there, right? Options for people. But you have to tell them at the open house,
Right.
this is my agency relationship until you hire me, because we've told people, I represent seller before, but you kind of give them a little bit of information, like, oh, I can send you this information, blah, blah. The mandate says, no buyer activity to be conducted without an agreement. So they then will have to decide, do they wanna hire you in a limited capacity? They don't have to be a buyer agent necessarily, so we could do limited agency or dual agency, but they need to decide before you do any services for you.
And the seller has to be aware.
And if it's
and-
dual
and
agency,
it-
the seller has to agree to it
Right,
as
right.
well. So if the seller has had a bad experience, which every once in a while we'll run across somebody that's not comfortable with dual agency, they might go, I hired you.
Yeah.
And I want you to solely represent me. So in that case, we would have to refer that buyer out to somebody else to write the contract, and they would have to hire that person again.
And I was also thinking, like, what, you know, all these sign calls and open house, unrepresented buyers, and then what do you do if they go through, maybe something with inspection scares them, and then they wanna move on from that house? Are you stuck with them? Cause will you have to sign a buyer's agency as a dual representation, or will?
But it can be for one
Yes.
day or
Yeah.
one property or
Correct.
1 week, yeah.
Correct.
So
Yes.
that's a.
And, you know, some people will make them cancelable.
Mhm.
It should be cancelable on both directions if you wanted to do that. But yeah, I mean, there's no rules
There's
or
so many
necessary
things, yeah.
regulations on.
And that's what,
And that's what scares me as
Yes.
a like
So
as a
open-ended.
consumer. So now I'm like, well, how do I know which agent is going? Like just because I
Well,
meet you at
interview
the
them,
open,
that's how.
interview, I guess.
And
but that's where I get
nobody
still,
did that.
But nobody ever still, even if you interview, you're not going to interview 12,000, 1,000. You
No.
probably interview what 5?
No, two.
Two.
I
You
mean,
see
most
what I
people
mean?
don't
Tuesday,
interview
That's my
multiple.
point. So how do you know? And
Two to
that's
three.
to me. I guess I always think that there's that hairline that. I guess this whole point was to be that maybe somebody like you started that we were slashing prices, but I'm like, no, actually, I don't know if that's what's going to happen. It's like a hairline to me that feels like maybe I could be paying more.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Right.
Like
Well,
it just
well,
feels.
it's funny because the lawsuit, actually the days I sat in on the trial, I heard the plaintiff's attorney making the argument that why should all realtors be paid the same amount when they have different skill set and different experience? So they were acting like, oh, they should be paid on a sliding scale. And you know, I got 27 years in, so I'm all happy for that. I
Right.
would
Yeah,
take
yeah.
that, right?
100%.
I would take that. But the question is, do you want to hire somebody that's way less experienced because their price is lower? Because we are going to see that there is going to be a race to the bottom with a certain group of agents. But you have to ask yourself, as a person that is buying the most expensive thing in your life and the most complicated, full of emotions transaction, do you want to get what you pay for?
Right.
Because that's what you're getting.
but we were all new agents
Especially
at
But
one
that
time.
already
market.
exists.
Yeah.
That already exists. You can sell your home on your own. You can do for sale by owner. You can hire a lower priced agent, and their value to you, depending on your expectations, could be exactly what you want, or it could fall short. And you can even negotiate. Well, you absolutely can negotiate with some of the best agents in town as well.
Right.
So that I just feel like a lot is changing, but nothing's changing.
Yeah.
In really the
It's more the psychology.
the
of it.
psychology.
Yes.
And I think that the other thing in my head that I'm always breaking down is strategy versus semantics. Like I'm not getting worked up in the paperwork right now. That's an easy question to the right person at the right time.
Yes.
It really is being strategic for your buyers and sellers. And I
Yes.
feel like if we as agents hold on to that It's a little bit, it's nuances and it's strategy, and it's exactly, bottom line is, it's what we do here every day, all day, anyway.
Correct.
It's just a new
New way of
conversation.
doing it.
Right.
Yes, yes. Which I think that if you're positive and you love what you do, it's actually really exciting. And if you are negative and scared, it may mean that you have to polish up on some of your strategies.
Yeah.
And either one is okay, and you'll get there.
And I think we all have felt that there's no way to gauge how good an agent is by the days or years that they've been an agent. You're an anomaly. You stay current, you stay active, but a lot of people in your time frame of being an agent are old and
Just do
used
a
to the
couple
old
deals a
ways
year.
and do a couple deals a year. So it's not, she's different, but somebody else 30 years in might not be the best. And there are new agents that are on top of it that are good, and then there's some 15 years in that are the same. So how do you, and I hope this levels up everyone. I hope that this is the good change.
Well, I think more so the change is for the consumer.
Yeah.
Really, which
Yeah.
that's the part that is exciting.
Right.
Because it is leveling that playing field a little bit from the agents that, thanks Mel.
Bye,
This
Mel.
way.
Sorry, I'm gonna go show my buyer that I have a contract with.
All right. Go sell a house. It is just changing the rules that are making the consumers have to follow the rules.
Yeah.
Where we were always trying to follow them before, but you can only control so much.
Something you said, that, the IDX feed, we all have websites that feed the listings from the MLS, including Zillow's a brokerage technically, and those, so they have the IDX feed from the MLS. And you said can't show them properties. Can we still email people like, here's the listings in the area, or here's the open houses, because that's how we engage with people to get them to call to go see the property. So is that gonna go?
I guess that's gonna be interpretation of agent activities. What is considered agent activities? So, and then one other last big myth that we need to bust, or not bust, but put some context to, is that sellers in those years, during the lawsuit years that were named, can receive significant restitution. Because when you win a class action lawsuit, right, you get those little mailers in the mail?
And
right?
it's divided by.
It's divided
how
by the
many
number of people that potentially sold their houses during that time frame. So the math has been done, not by me, but by statistically I've seen on several outlets, that what a seller is looking at for that significant restitution is anywhere from $10 to $18.
Yeah, I saw $10.
Now, the attorneys are making upwards of $80 million, according to what they filed to the judge that they would receive for compensation, which is less than their standard 33 to 40%. But when you talk about what realtors make compared to the realtors, to attorneys that were driving this whole entire lawsuit, walking away with upwards of $80 million from this settlement, and the sellers are walking away with under $20.
That's what I've said this whole
So
time.
who
If you
was
wanna-
this done for?
If you want to be
So
part of the
what
change,
was
be
this
part of
really about?
change, but really, they're just.
If you're
looking
worried
at their
about home
pockets.
prices, let's
Yeah.
donate that $80 million,
To the buyers.
Michael.
Yeah, to the
Back
low-income buyers.
to,
that-
back to the buyers that
Yeah,
can't
that's
afford
fine.
to pay
They can't.
commissions. How about that?
Yeah.
We set up a buyer's fund with $80 million.
Yeah.
That would be
That would be amazing.
That is-
Because I do think one thing we didn't touch on is the big debate and the big uproar about VA buyers.
Oh, yeah.
So everybody's saying, well, it's one thing to not be able to afford it, which is a lot of buyers, whether they're even first-time buyers or not. A lot of people do not have the cash sitting around to come up with closing costs, their escrows, their down payment, and a commission. But let's assume more so than not, it's gonna be first-time buyers, or particularly the people that go for the low down payment loans such as FHA or VA, which is a 0% down payment loan. They're doing that a lot of times because they either don't have the cash or they don't want to give up their cash.
Yeah, they want to utilize their VA benefit, which they're entitled
Correct,
to.
which they're entitled to for serving our country.
Right.
Now, there is language currently in the VA restrictions, the Veterans Administration restrictions, that specifically state that a buyer cannot pay for agent commissions. Now, I've heard some talk that potentially the interpretation of that maybe has been a little off all these years, and maybe they can, like they're looking into that. But currently, right now, the masses are under the belief that it's not allowed by the VA.
Right.
So even if the buyer says, I will pay you, is the Veterans Administration gonna come back and go, no, you can't do it, just like we couldn't do termite for the longest time.
Right,
Isn't
right,
that changed now?
Yes.
So for the longest time, when we would write a VA offer, the buyer was not allowed for whatever strange reason to pay for their own termite inspection. So we were conditioned forever to write it in, seller to pay buyers, termite inspection, right? And they did.
Right.
So seller to pay buyers commissions, totally fine. But if we would put on there, buyer to pay for that termite inspection, boop, boop, kicked out. So the same thing with commissions is what is being interpreted right now, is that they're disallowed to pay an agent commission. So that part we're still waiting on, possibly some changes or reinterpretation of the current language. Expect something to make some changes there.
And we're not as directly affected by USDA in our area, but what about agents where that's their
main,
where they live and eat
buyers,
and breathe?
So are they
Yeah.
supposed
That's
to work
their-
for free?
their loan of
Yeah.
choice.
Yes. So like I said, there's still some questions and not all the answers, but I think this should have cleared up a lot of the bunk that's out there, that's the headline clickbait
Headlines,
stuff. And again, the best thing you can do is call one of us, one of these beautiful agents sitting here, and have a sit down with them. Sit down, let's talk about it. Every single day we're getting a little more clarity, a little more information, but ultimately it is a little bit of a moving target right now. Nothing has changed yet. So if you are a buyer wanting to jump out there and get moving before you start seeing some sellers pull that concession off the table, maybe now is a good time to get your tennis shoes on and start looking at houses again.
For sure.
And then stay tuned, because we'll keep you updated on all the changes and all of the interpretations as they continue to unfold.